If you have ever sat alone after one of those conversations and thought, I wish they could feel this just once, you are not a cruel person. You are likely someone who has been pushed past confusion, past patience, and into a kind of emotional exhaustion that is hard to explain to anyone who has never lived through it. You tried to be fair. You tried to explain. You tried to stay calm, stay loving, stay understanding. And somehow, every time, you still ended up carrying the weight of what happened. The pain, the self-doubt, the anxiety, the replaying of every word. So when you ask how to make a narcissist feel the same pain they caused you, what you are really asking is something deeper. You are asking, will they ever understand what they did to me? You are asking, will reality ever reach them? You are asking, will there ever be balance after all the harm I had to hold by myself? The first truth you need to hear is that you were not the problem. You were not too sensitive. You were not too needy. You were not impossible to love. What made the relationship so painful was not that you failed to communicate correctly. It was that you were dealing with a person who needed control more than connection, image more than honesty, and emotional power more than mutual understanding. That imbalance changes everything. It means you are often trying to solve a problem as if it were a misunderstanding, when in reality it was a pattern. A narcissistic person does not create pain the way a healthy person does when they make a mistake and feel bad about it. They create pain through distortion, deflection, entitlement, and emotional manipulation. They may lie, deny, blame, withdraw, provoke, compare, idealize, devalue, and then act confused about why you are hurt. They may say they love you while consistently eroding your sense of safety. They may seem wounded when confronted, but that does not always mean they are taking responsibility. Very often, it means they are reacting to loss of control. That is the psychological core of this. For many narcissistic people, pain is not processed in a reflective way. It is defended against. Underneath the arrogance, coldness, or grandiosity, there is usually a fragile self that cannot tolerate shame, powerlessness, or emotional exposure. So instead of facing those feelings directly, they protect themselves by projecting them outward. They make you feel what they do not want to feel. They hand you the confusion they cannot sit with. They give you the blame they cannot carry. They unload their inner instability into the relationship, and if you are empathetic, you will often pick it up without even realizing it. This is why you can leave a conversation feeling guilty, even when you were the one harmed. This is why you can start out trying to address one clear issue and end up defending your tone, your memory, your motives, your character. This is why you can spend years trying to prove your sincerity to someone who benefits from keeping you uncertain. The system only works if you stay engaged in their version of reality. One of the most painful things about narcissistic abuse is that it trains you to focus on their feelings while abandoning your own. You become highly skilled at reading the room, predicting shifts, softening your words, waiting for the right moment, making excuses for their behavior, and calming situations you did not create. Over time, this does something serious to your nervous system. You stop feeling like a person in a relationship and start feeling like a manager of emotional damage. You become hyper-aware, hyper-vigilant, and deeply tired. And because the moments of relief can feel so intense after the chaos, you may mistake temporary peace for real intimacy. That is why revenge is such an understandable fantasy. When you have been unseen for so long, the idea of them finally feeling your pain can seem like justice. But here is the hard truth. Trying to make a narcissist hurt the way you hurt usually keeps you tied to them psychologically. It keeps your healing dependent on their reaction. It keeps you waiting for a level of empathy or insight they may never access in a stable way. And that waiting can drain years from your life. The real answer is not about making them feel your pain through punishment, guilt, or emotional games. The real answer is that the deepest pain for a narcissistic person often begins when they can no longer control your mind, your attention, your emotional availability, or your identity. Not because you are trying to hurt them, but because you are no longer participating in the arrangement that protected them from themselves. Think about how the pattern worked. They may have kept you in cycles of hope and disappointment. They may have said just enough to keep you attached, then pulled away when you needed consistency. They may have enjoyed being pursued, reassured, admired, forgiven, or emotionally centered. They may have expected access to you without accountability. That only works when you remain open to being pulled back into the role they assigned you. The role of fixer, admirer, caretaker, target, or emotional container. When you step out of that role, something shifts. Not always outwardly. They may act unaffected. They may move on quickly. They may act superior. They may even seem happier for a while. But when someone who relied on control loses access to that control, it confronts them with something they do not manage well. Irrelevance, limitation, and the fact that another person has an inner life they cannot command. For a narcissistic person, that can feel threatening in a way they rarely admit. This is why calm detachment matters so much. Not coldness, not revenge, not dramatic speeches designed to wound them back. Calm detachment. The ability to stop over-explaining, stop pleading, stop proving, stop chasing closure from someone committed to misunderstanding you. The ability to become emotionally unavailable to the cycle, even if you are still grieving privately. The ability to hold your truth without needing them to validate it. That kind of shift is powerful because it changes the emotional economy of the relationship. You are no longer feeding it with your confusion, your reactions, your attempts to repair what they keep breaking. You stop giving them front-row access to your pain. You stop letting your wounds become material for further control. And whether they consciously understand it or not, they feel that loss. Another important truth is that narcissistic people often do not experience pain the same way healthy, reflective people do. A healthy person feels pain, looks inward, and asks, "What did I do? How did I contribute? What needs to change?" A narcissistic person often feels pain and asks, "Who caused this? Who failed me? Who is disrespecting me? How do I regain the upper hand?" So, if your goal is to get them to sit down, feel remorse, understand your tears, and finally connect the dots, you may keep breaking your own heart. That does not mean they feel nothing. It means what they feel may not become empathy. They may feel rejection, humiliation, envy, exposure, loss of supply, loss of image, loss of access, or injury to their ego. They may feel the sting of not being chosen, not being obeyed, not being centered. But those feelings do not automatically turn into insight. That is why so many survivors stay stuck. They see signs that the narcissistic person is affected and assume understanding is coming next. But being affected and being accountable are not the same thing. This matters because clarity protects you. Once you understand that the pain they feel may be very different from the pain they caused, you stop measuring your healing by whether they get it. You stop trying to create the perfect explanation. You stop offering one last chance after another in hopes that this time they will become emotionally honest. You begin to accept that closure may not come from their recognition. It may come from your own. Recognition starts with naming the pattern more honestly. If you were constantly confused, that confusion was information. If you felt drained after every interaction, that exhaustion was information. If you kept apologizing for things you did not do just to restore peace, that was information. If you were praised when compliant and punished when independent, that was information. If your feelings were treated as attacks, while their attacks were treated as truth, that was information. Your body knew before your mind was ready to admit it. Once you start seeing the pattern, your next step is not to argue with it harder. It is to step back from it. Emotional distance is often what finally reveals what emotional involvement kept hiding. When you are in the middle of the cycle, everything feels urgent. You want to explain, correct, defend, repair. But distance lets you see the structure. You begin to notice how predictable it was, how every conflict became about their comfort, how every repair attempt required your humility, but not theirs, how your empathy was used as a door they could keep re-entering without changing. This is where self-respect becomes more important than emotional proof. Self-respect says, I do not need to stay in pain to prove I loved deeply. Self-respect says, I can accept what this is, even if I wish it were different. Self-respect says, my compassion for someone else does not require abandoning myself. That is not hardness. That is recovery. Boundaries are a major part of this recovery, and they are often misunderstood. Boundaries are not threats. They are not performances. They are not meant to force a narcissistic person into growth. Boundaries are how you protect your energy, your mind, your time, and your emotional reality. Sometimes a boundary sounds like saying less. Sometimes it looks like no contact. Sometimes it means not responding to bait, not explaining your reasons 10 different ways, not reopening conversations that only lead to distortion. Sometimes it means accepting that access to you is a privilege, not a right. And yes, when a narcissistic person realizes that they can no longer easily provoke you, confuse you, or pull you back into the role they preferred, that can affect them deeply. Not because you attacked them, but because your peace exposes the limits of their power. Your steadiness becomes a mirror they often do not want to look into. Your refusal to play the old role means they can no longer define the emotional landscape so easily. There is also something else that hurts them more than people realize. Being ordinary in your eyes. Not hated, not feared, not worshipped, not obsessed over, just seen clearly. When you no longer idealize them, no longer defend them, no longer organize your emotions around them, they lose the version of themselves that your attention was helping hold in place. Again, this is not revenge. This is reality. You are no longer lending your life force to a false image. But to reach that place, you will probably have to grieve. And this is where many people get confused. They think that if they are still hurting, they must still be trapped. Not necessarily. Sometimes pain is no longer a sign of bondage. Sometimes it is the cost of seeing clearly. You are grieving the person you hoped they were, the love you kept trying to build, the fairness you kept expecting, the future you kept repairing in your mind. You are grieving the version of yourself that had to shrink just to stay connected. That grief is real. It deserves respect. Healing does not mean you stop feeling angry. It means the anger becomes cleaner, less tangled, less desperate. It stops being, "How do I make them finally feel this?" and becomes, "I understand now what happened, and I will not keep offering myself to it." That is a very different kind of power. It is quiet. It does not need applause. It does not need them to agree. It simply changes what you allow. If you are still in contact with this person, your healing may look simple from the outside but difficult on the inside. Shorter replies, fewer explanations, less emotional access, more pauses before responding, more attention to your body when something feels off, less defending, less urgency, more observation, more limits, more respect for the part of you that kept trying to survive. If you are no longer in contact, your healing may look like resisting the urge to check, compare, decode, or search for signs that they miss you. It may look like allowing silence to be silence, letting absence be information, letting peace feel unfamiliar for a while without running back to chaos just because chaos feels emotionally intense. And if part of you still wants them to hurt, be gentle with yourself about that. That desire usually comes from a wound that was ignored too long. It comes from the human need for fairness. But your life gets better when you stop trying to deliver justice through emotional entanglement. Your healing deepens when you understand that the best answer to what they did is not to become consumed by their inner world. It is to come back to your own. The same pain they caused you was never just about events. It was about erosion. It was about losing trust in your perception, losing steadiness in your body, losing your right to take up emotional space. So the way forward has to be deeper than reaction. You do not rebuild by making them suffer. You rebuild by restoring what was taken from you. Your clarity, your boundaries, your voice, your rhythm, your self-trust. In the end, what affects a narcissistic person most is not your revenge. It is your release. It is the moment your worth is no longer negotiable. It is the moment your peace matters more to you than their approval. It is the moment you stop trying to be understood by someone who depended on misunderstanding you. It is the moment you become unreachable to the old pattern, not because you are numb, but because you are awake. And that is where real closure begins. Not when they confess everything, not when they finally say the perfect words, not when they carry your pain in the exact way you carried theirs. Real closure begins when you no longer need their emotional participation in your healing. When you can say, quietly and honestly, "I see what this was now. I know what it did to me. And I am not staying in it anymore." That is not weakness. That is not avoidance. That is strength with clarity in it. That is self-respect after confusion. That is peace earned the hard way. You do not have to make them feel what they did in order for your pain to matter. Your pain already matters. You do not have to prove how deeply you were hurt for your experience to be real. It is real. And you do not have to keep carrying the question of whether they understand. The more important question is whether you understand enough now to choose yourself. Choose the peace that does not need their permission. Choose the boundary that protects your mind. Choose the truth that brings your body out of survival. Choose the life that is no longer organized around someone else's control. That is how you end the cycle. That is how you stop handing your heart to someone who kept using it against you. And that is how you finally give yourself something they could never give you: stability, dignity, and the freedom to move forward without looking back for permission to heal.